Welcome to the Cash Car Convert Podcast, episode 24.
You're listening to the Cash Car Convert Podcast with James Kinson.
Hello and welcome to the Cash Car Convert Podcast. My name is James Kinson and I am the Cash Car Convert. This is the podcast where cash cars are cool and auto debt is dangerous to your financial future. I'm very excited today. I have a gentleman on that I'm just a huge fan of. I have so much respect for what he does in his personal life, in his professional life, and the way he conducts himself in general. He's a real generous individual and has helped just so many people. He's also an author. He is the New York Times best-selling author of 48 Days to the Work You Love, No More Dreaded Mondays, and Wisdom Meets Passion. He's also been a guest on CBS's The Early Show, MSNBC's Hardball with Chris Matthews, and The Dave Ramsey Show. He's also a prominent public speaker who is in demand all over the nation. He's got a podcast, which is in the top 3 under the careers category of iTunes, and that's the 48 Days podcast. And then he has the 48days.net business community, and it's viewed as an example around the world for those seeking to find or create work they love. And I'm a member of that community, and I think it's a really fantastic place to interface with like-minded individuals. With that, let me please welcome Dan Miller to the show. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the Cash Car Convert Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent.
Glad to hear it. Hey, Dan, this podcast is dedicated to cash cars. And as such, I like to ask everybody that comes on my show, what is the first car they ever purchased, and how did that work out for you?
Wow. The first car I actually purchased myself was I bought a 1931 Ford Model A body. Bought it for $275, and it was just a rough body. And so I started with that. There was no engine or anything, and I chopped and channeled it, took it down, built a boxed frame for it, put it on that, and then got an old blown Chrysler 331 Hemi engine, and I slowly pieced that together. So, I mean, it was $5 here, $10 at the junkyard. I'd get a generator and then something else, and then I got some Renault bucket seats, paid $35 for them and put it in. But I pieced that car together, piece by piece, over about a year and a half before I ever pulled it out of the chicken coop on our property. I was a poor farm kid, and man, when I paid that initial $275 for the car, my dad thought I was nuts. But that was the first car that I actually owned, and it was my pride and joy. I had a whole lot of blood, sweat, and tears in it by the time I pulled it out, and I learned a tremendous amount about cars. But I also learned that, as opposed to kids whose dad took them down to the dealership and signed a note, to get a car, that there were other ways to get cars other than the normal process. And that opened up a world of just exciting opportunities for me along the way since then.
So, Dan, I wanted to ask you, and I've heard you talk about, being in the car business and so forth before, but I never have really heard you speak about, how you started working on cars. And it sounds like this was your first kind of foray into that space. So was this just trial and error for you? Did you had you worked on some other cars with some other people, or did you just jump in and start doing this?
No, I was a 17-year-old kid, and I had no training at all. I grew up on a farm, so I had the privilege of having exposure to a little bit of plumbing, a little bit of carpentry, a little bit of electrical, and all of that. But my dad knew nothing about mechanics. So I very quickly gravitated, when I was just a little kid, at 7, 8 years old, I'd find an old lawnmower and I'd take it all apart, totally down to the little needles that shot the gasoline into the carburetor to understand how they worked. I was always fascinated with mechanics and how things work, but I learned totally just by doing. Never had any kind of coursework in that, and so I would find opportunities to hang around with my buddies who knew a little bit more than I did, and they'd help, but a lot of it was just simply in the doing.
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, I know we're going to talk about your history with cars and some of those sorts of things, but we may not get into as much of your backstory as I would typically like to. So is there a podcast that we could point people to that is gives a good bit of your backstory and is somebody something you'd like to point people to?
Not a particular podcast. I mean, my ongoing 48 Days podcast, I weave in a whole lot of stories there. I pulled one out in just the current podcast about when I went back to graduate school, a valuable lesson I learned. So it's woven into the 48 Days podcast, but I don't really have a My Story podcast. That's a good idea. Perhaps I need to do that.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's good. Well, I'll certainly be directing people to the 48 Days podcast. As that's certainly one that's on my list every week to listen to. It's one I really look forward to every Friday. So,
thank you
for that. So, Dan, I've never worked in the car business myself, so I'm, from that perspective, a lay person. But what I've done is I've bought and sold a lot of cars myself, and I've always done that really by using common sense and kind of being a noticer. So using a few techniques I've learned along the way myself, but really just being very aware of surroundings and little things about a car that would tell me whether it was or wasn't a good deal. And even with that, I've certainly been burned on occasion. But I know from having spoken to you or having listened to your podcast, feels like I've spoken to you, that you buy cars a lot of different ways. And I, since most of the people I'm dealing with are in debt and they don't have a lot of margin, I'm trying to really kind of tilt the scales in their favor as much as I can. So I was wondering, what kind of tips and techniques you might recommend to just the average person that's going out there and buying a car.
Sure. I've got some just basic principles that have served me really well. And I've purchased cars on Craigslist, on eBay, on Car Guru, yard sales, estate sales, spot them in somebody's field in the backyard. I mean, just whatever. But here's the real key to getting great deals. This is one of my premises. I'm always ready, but never desperate. That means I've always got the cash ready to purchase something, but I never go out in a have-to kind of situation where I have to buy something today. But I'm always ready. That way, I have a lot of fun. I mean, I love scanning the site, looking for cars and things. My wife knows that, late night, I'm on a computer. She doesn't have to worry about the kind of material I'm looking at because she knows it's going to be cars.
That's great.
That's what I love looking at. So I just scan things. But I just recently, on a Sunday afternoon, saw something come up on Craigslist. I thought, oh my gosh, it was a John Deere tractor with a front-end loader and a bush hog. And I thought, that just looks amazing. Only had 413 hours on it. And I said, I just called the guy immediately. And I said, you know what? I'd just like to come look at that. So I did. And I just bought it on the spot. Called a wrecker, a rollback truck to come and pick it up, bring it back to my house. Now, I wasn't really looking for a tractor, but it was just such a remarkable deal. I got it here because, for one thing, I know I could flip it and make $2,000 in a heartbeat. But now that I've had it here and used it a little bit, I think I'm going to keep it. It's just a perfect size. I can introduce my grandkids to driving it. It has all the latest features in terms of if you jump off the seat or fall off accidentally, of course, everything stops. And so I think I'm just going to keep it. But that's pretty much the way I am. I'll just see something and think, boy, there's a deal. And I go get it. Now, there have been times when I really needed to, help somebody get something. And it's pretty easy to pick out, say on Craigslist, to pick out 8 cars to go look at it on Saturday morning. Boy, if you've got cash and they're ready to go, it's amazing what you can get by, again, not being locked into one particular car, but to have 4 or 5 where you'd say this would really meet the bill, and you make offers. It's amazing what people will take if you have cash in your hand and they're ready to go. This business of now I got to go to the bank and see if I can get a loan. I mean, you totally remove your bargaining power if you're in that position. You then are the victim, and rightfully so. But so that always be ready, but never be in a hurry.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice as well. And one of the things that you mentioned, I get a lot of people who try to tell me or ask me, hey, can you tell me what kind of cars I ought to be buying? And And I'm like, that's not really what I do. I want to enable you, as the buyer to go out and do your own research, educate you on how to look things up on Edmunds and Carfax and use all those tools to find a good car, but then, enable you to go make that decision yourself. And so I've done a lot of work around that. The other thing that comes to mind as you were speaking there, one of the things is that you found something that you were interested in and you took action straight away. And I think a lot of people, they sit back and they wait maybe too long. And I know this principle can go into much broader context, but what is that cost of indecision in people's lives in general?
Oh my gosh, that's a big deal. I mean, indecision is the greatest thief of opportunity. Yeah, if you're going to get deals on cars, you have to be ready to pull the trigger. I love to go to auctions. Absolutely love it. But, have worked major auctions like the Los Angeles Auto Auction. The car comes through and, sometimes it's going to be there for 30 seconds. You don't drive it. You don't look under the hood. You have to be that prepared and make a decision. And that's an environment where, can you get burned? Yeah. But you can also get some amazing deals if you're prepared. Now, that's part of the deal. And one of the things about cars, James, that really concerns me, I have people, because I do talk about it, say, well, man, I want to do like you're doing. I want to flip cars and make a lot of money. And then I find out that they don't know how to release the hood, on a Camaro. I'm thinking, dude, don't do that. Do something else. The only reason I have a lot of fun with cars, and I've always made money with cars, because I love cars. I've spent a lot of time working on them. I know them. I understand them. That's a lot different than just saying, I'm going to do this as a way to make money. That's a way to get burned real quick.
Yeah, so for the layperson out there, because going to an auction, I haven't done that myself. I haven't been a dealer, and so I haven't really worked that side of things. Is that the kind of thing, if somebody had connections, would you recommend that somebody go to an auction, or would you recommend that somebody who doesn't have a lot of margin in their life would be better served to stay away from that sort of thing? Even though you've had really good luck with it, you have some margin. You can afford to absorb a bad decision or two.
It really comes back to how knowledgeable are you. If you're not knowledgeable and you aren't sure if that little ticking you hear, is a valve or bearing, and you need to take it to a mechanic, then don't do it with an auction. Use other methods to get them. But I love auctions, and like here in Nashville, there's a lot of auctions that you can go to without being a dealer or anything. You just go. Now, part of the contingency is that you're prepared to pay in the spot. Again, you don't buy at an auction and then go visit your bank to see if you can get financing. You buy, pay on the spot, and drive it out of there. But I bought a BMW one time at an auction. It was a repo auction. Those are the kind of auctions that are in any town. There's lots and lots of traffic in the repo world. And people who got into trouble, unfortunately so. We don't need to take advantage of them, but these are auctions where the banks are just wanting to get rid of the merchandise that they now possess. But I bought a BMW. I paid $1,635 for it. Drove it out. There was a real violent vibration. I went and got the drive shaft bearing replaced. It's about halfway back in the car on that particular model BMW. It cost me $135. So I had roughly, $1,700 in the car. The papers were in the glove box where some little gal had paid $7,750 for the car less than 6 months prior to the time that I bought it.
Wow.
That's a big bump. And that car was, I actually had my daughter drive it to college for a couple years, and then ended up selling it and still made a couple $1,000 on it. But at auctions, if you are prepared and if you're knowledgeable enough to be comfortable with the decisions, but here's the deal. If I bought that car and that noise, that violent vibration, was a transmission rather than just bearing, it could have cost me $2,500 to get it fixed. But guess what? If I paid $2,500 for it, so I ended up, with $5,000 in it, I was still in good shape in the car. So that's where there's such opportunity to get amazing deals. And if you're doing a couple deals a month, so if you get a bad one, it's no big deal. Here's an interesting thing, James. When I was in the car business, briefly in California years and years ago, I just graduated with my master's degree in clinical psychology and found myself, I loved being in the car business and just naturally gravitated into it with a friend of mine, and we rocked and rolled, had a ball. But I had an old gentleman who worked for me on the car lot. This was in Southern California, and he would come in, his name was Cecil, and he'd come in and wipe the cars down every morning and just kind of keep things okay. I was in and out a lot, so he was always there, but I did the selling. But I learned a lot about the car business from him. I used to brag to him about how I would make money on every single car. Every single car I sold, I'd made money. And he says, Dan, if you're making money on every single car, you're missing a whole lot of opportunity. You aren't risking enough. And it was a really important lesson for me to learn, and which I implemented immediately, thinking, you know what? Yeah, you're right. If I'm always winning, I'm not risking enough. So if I buy a car, I bought a car one time, the LA Auto Auction, it was an Oldsmobile 4-door, and I had my wife drive it home, and it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. And about halfway home, the engine blew, totally blew on it. Major expense. I don't lose any sleep over that because in the scope of things, it's like if you're an entrepreneur, so you're making your own income, you don't look at your income day to day, week to week, or even month to month. You look at it over a year. And that's another lesson I learned from this gentleman in the car business because, if I went, 3 days and didn't sell a car, geez, I'd really panic. He says, Dan, you don't look at your income day to day, week to week, or even month to month. He says, if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to make more money than you ever dreamed of. And that was exactly true. First year, just selling used cars in Southern California, I made like 4 times as much money as I'd ever made in my life.
Wow. Sort of the interesting thing there for me is taking the extra risk. And I think, so many people, whether it's their jobs or cars or whatever it is, they are afraid to take that risk. So instead of taking a risk on buying a cash car they can really afford, people think they're playing it safe by buying a new car, paying $30,000, having it to depreciate, $7 or $8 grand the first year, and they think that's playing it safe. I know that's nothing you ever do. I know I've heard you talk about how you buy cars, you drive them for a while, then you flip them and make some money on them. Can you tell me, how you go about doing that? And I know obviously you go through the auctions and so forth. What principle drives you on that? So that you don't really, it doesn't cost you money to drive cars while the rest of us are out there, either like me paying cash for them, but still it's got a cost associated with it, or, some poor guy buying a new car and paying 30 grand.
Yeah. People have always admired the cars I drive. I like to drive fast, flashy cars, and I always have. But here's an example. I recently had a Mercedes 500 SL, red convertible. Thing would absolutely scream. Loved that car. Well, I had a business associate here from North Carolina, and I said, hey, let's go to lunch. And I said, I'll drive. Boom, pop the top down and went to. And he says, oh my gosh. He said, this would be my dream. Someday when I'm able to spend $70,000, $80,000 on a car, this is the kind of car that I want. Well, I didn't want to make him feel bad, but he was riding in a car that I paid $7,600 for. I buy cars that have classic design where somebody can't tell if it's 5 years old or 20 years old. There's a lot of cars like that. So I drive cars. Right now, my wife is driving a Lincoln Aviator that she absolutely loves. I'm driving a Mercedes SUV. But in the cars that I've had Jaguars and Volvos and all kinds of really cool stuff, but I've never paid $12,000 for a vehicle. And that's something that people, and then I buy them, and like your question is, how does it not cost me anything? And it doesn't. It just doesn't. When you look at it all said and done, I drive cars for free. That Mercedes that I had, I kept it a lot longer than I normally would. I kept it for 4 years, put tons of miles on it, absolutely enjoyed it, loaned it out to people and the whole thing. I sold it, and sold it for $600 less than what I had paid for it 4 years earlier.
Wow.
Now, that's an exception because I usually don't keep a car that long. But with cars, it's like real estate. You make your money when you buy it. It's not by hoodwinking somebody when you sell it. I mean, everybody ought to be able to know what a car is worth. The deal is find that exceptional buy. If you purchase it right, you can drive a car for free. So I drive these really nice cars, that people admire. Oh, man, it must be nice, to be able to drive this. And meanwhile, they're driving, a Ford Focus where they're upside down and making a $450 a month payment. I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. You know how much more money you're spending on cars than I am? I don't spend a lot of money on cars. I spend nothing on cars. But it's because I understand them, buy them right. I usually keep a car usually less than a year. If I ever get a notice from the state that it's time to renew the tags, I'm like, oh my gosh, I've kept this car too long.
I like that. That's great. So Dan, one of the things I appreciate about you, and I think it's one of the things that I really like about listening to your podcast, is that you don't take the standard approach to so many things in life, and I don't know exactly where that unique point of view came from, but I want to just tell the listeners, I heard something the other day, and it said, if you're living an average life, doing what everybody else is doing, then you're doing something wrong. And I contrast that to what you're doing, where, almost everything you do is counter to what we would consider the norm. And yet you have tremendous success. You get to do these things like drive these really nice cars with no investment. And so where did you get that, your ability to think outside the box, to use a cliche?
I'm not sure I can trace it all the way back, but funny, just this morning I was explaining to a couple ladies who were here in my office space that we call the sanctuary and converted barn, and on Wednesday mornings there's a bunch of artist ladies who are here. So there were a couple new ladies here from out of state, and I was explaining to them my latest book that they were asking about. And on my latest book, wrote with my son, and he has a different last name than I do. He chose to intentionally choose a last name that was really meaningful. And I was telling these ladies, here's a son who has never done anything normal in his life. And my wife was within hearing distance, and she says, just like his dad. I don't know. I grew up on the farm. I think that gives you a unique opportunity to experience a lot of different things. And I've just always been a guy who has seen opportunity everywhere. So, when I was, 8, 9 years old and realized my mom we had picked all the sweet corn that she could possibly get in the freezer, and yet there's still sweet corn in the garden, I'd get up at 5:30 in the morning, pick it, put it in a little trailer that fit behind our family tractor, and I'd drive 2 miles up to where the paved road was and park there with a sign and sell sweet corn. I've always just seen opportunities like that. So it came from just trying a lot of new things. I don't think, people would think, well, gee, I'm not a risk taker. That's not really what this is all about. I mean, risk is if I take the title to my current car, go to Las Vegas and put it down on a table, with the roll of the dice, either I keep it or I don't. That's risk. I would never in a million years do that. I don't take this kind of risk, but we reduce risk dramatically by having a careful plan, by being knowledgeable and creating a plan of execution. So I always do that on the ideas that I pursue, but I'm always seeing new ideas. I'm doing some things this year that I've never done before and put it out there. Is there a guarantee? No, not at all. Not a guarantee. But there's also a tremendous opportunity for doing something extraordinary that's a lot of fun and also to produce extraordinary income. And I'm energized by those kind of opportunities. The safe path has just never appealed to me. I mean, I was an employee for a very short period of time once right after I graduated from college. And there were some circumstances that kind of set me up for that. But it was a very brief period of time. But other than that, I've never had a real job. There was a short period of time where I was in the car business, with a friend, where I would just get part of the net proceeds when we sold them. But I've never really officially been in the car business. It's always just been something I do for fun. My head still jerks around. Man, I live here in Franklin, Tennessee, and we've got a whole bunch of empty lots where car dealerships these last few years, didn't survive. And man, every time I go by an empty lot, I think, oh my gosh, I could have 30 cars sitting there and just have an absolute ball. Now, I'm not going to do that because I've got some other things that are working pretty well in my life at this point, but it still is a real enticing area for me. And what I do, frankly, at this point with cars is I don't buy cars and try to make money on them, but that idea of always being ready, I find some amazing deals where I can buy cars very inexpensively, make sure they check out okay mechanically, and then we're able to give them to people who really are trying to get a fresh start. My wife works as a volunteer at the Tennessee Prison for Women. And, that's a major issue. These gals get out, boy, nobody will hire them, nobody will give them a place to live, and nobody will give them something to drive, and they're just really limited. Well, one of the things that we can do is I can give them something to drive. And that's been a real blessing to help some gals kind of get on their feet to get a fresh start.
That's fantastic. I have actually considered doing that for our local church. They have a car donation program, and I thought I might, buy a car, use my techniques for doing it, and then donate that, and kind of help build my brand with what I'm doing, and at the same time help some folks. So I really respect the fact that you and your wife give back in that way. That's a really important thing.
Well, it scratches my itch because I love to hunt. I love looking for stuff, but to find something, where I could make $500 or whatever, that's not really my goal. So, but I bought a car not that long ago. It was a Chrysler New Yorker. A couple had bought it brand new, and then the lady died, and so he was ready to sell it. It had 119,000 miles on it. One owner. It was showroom fresh, had all the records from day one, oil changes and the whole thing, and I paid $1,000 for it. Wow. How amazing is that?
That's very.
That ought to serve somebody for 10 years, $1,000. So when I talk about giving cars away, I'm not talking about $10,000 cars. I'm talking about the kind of things you can get for $1,000, $1,500, and there's amazing deals out there every day.
Yeah, that's one of my sayings. Actually, is something along those lines. I say the deal of a lifetime in cars comes along every couple of weeks.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, Dan, I want to be really respectful of your time. I know we're coming up to the end of our time here. And so I want to ask you, what's one piece of advice you'd give to our listeners?
My one piece of advice would be, it's never too late to have a new beginning. I hear all the time, well, gee, from 27-year-olds, I made the wrong choice and major in college. Now I just kind of have to coast into the grave. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It doesn't matter if you're 17 or 77. If you want to do something new, draw a line in the sand and just decide, what's it going to look like? And I love encouraging people to try things they've not done before and to experience new opportunities.
Perfect. Thank you. Where can people best find you? Where would you like for me to send folks?
48days.com has a lot of information there, and then 48days.net is a real active community of people who think like you and I do, who know there are new ways to do things and are committed to doing that. Probably the best way to really connect with my ongoing thinking and sharing about new ideas is my podcast, 48 Days Podcast. I love that. Quick, being able to share things that have happened yesterday or whatever, and sharing how we can take advantage of some of the new opportunities around us.
Wow. Well, I will link up to all those in the show notes for sure. And Dana, I just want to thank you for being on. It was an honor to be speaking with you.
Well, thanks, man. You know, I'm doing a lot of interviews today, as a matter of fact, but trust me, there's none that get my juices going as much as talking about cars. So it's been a real delight for me, and hopefully we can stimulate some new hope and inspiration for your listeners. Thanks for having me on as a guest, James.
You bet. Thank you, Dan. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is James Kinson, and I welcome you back from my interview with Dan Miller. I hope you really enjoyed that interview. I did. Dan is just an outstanding guy. He's got such a positive energy, and I think that's one of the things I really love about his podcast is that he's always being so positive. And it's not a Pollyannish kind of positive. I mean, it's a practical, real world kind of positive, and he does a really good job with that. So I'm really glad that he was on and that you were able to hear that. Now, obviously, Dan's a car guy, so I absolutely wanted him on to talk about cars and how he finds some really good deals and how he thinks about looking for cars. And so there are a few things I took away from that I want to highlight here. And I think the first one is, he said, always be ready, but never desperate. And I thought this was such a good thing for him to share. First, from the perspective of cars, which is the context in which he was using it, always being ready for the opportunity that presents itself. So when you've got the cash in hand and you find several cars that are in your price range, then you can go and look at them and you won't feel desperate like it's your only option. And I can assure you, when it comes to used cars, there's opportunities out there, and you don't need to feel pressured to buy the first one you come across. So be patient and always be ready, but never desperate. Now, the other thing about that phrase is that I think it's a great thing to apply in a broader context across all of our lives. And how much better would our lives be if we did in fact do that? So, I thought about that in the context of, if I was always ready for the opportunities that present themselves, but I was never desperate, like I felt like I had to take any one of them, how much better would things be? How much more at peace would I be about what's going on in my life? So I think that's a really good takeaway, and something we all ought to strive for, to put ourselves in a position where we have enough margin in our lives that we can take advantage of opportunities as they present themselves, but we're not desperate to take them. So I thought that was a really great takeaway. Really pleased he shared that. He also talked about auctions, and I thought the advice he gave there was very good as well. If you're not a car person, if you don't know about the mechanics of a car and how it runs and works, then you shouldn't go to an auction with the intent of buying a car. It would, you probably would come out a little worse for the wear and for having made the effort. So I would say stick with what I've taught so far about how to go and find and buy cars. It gives you more margin. It gives you more information about the cars and about the sellers, and tilts the odds a bit more in your favor. So that's definitely the recommendation I'm going to make to you right now. Now, I may go and check out the an auto auction around the Dallas-Fort Worth area and just to kind of get a feel for it, so I'll have some credibility when I speak about it, and just see if I can get a handle on how that piece of everything works. But for now, the key message is, if you don't know cars, don't go to auctions. So let's just leave it at that. The other great takeaway with Dan is that he's a student of cars. He knows a lot about the car industry. It fascinates him. He enjoys it. And that's something he and I share. I like looking for cars. I like looking on Craigslist. I like looking on Auto Trader and searching for cars. It's entertainment for me. I find it fun and interesting. If you do as well, then you've got a lot higher odds of finding a good car, because you're going to be out there looking more often. And that means when an opportunity presents itself, you may be one of the first ones to show up, and that can make all the difference. So I thought that was a really important thing that was probably obvious, but I just wanted to make sure and point that out, that the hunt is about half the fun of buying a car for me. So I really enjoy that. I should also mention that Dan talked about a Mercedes convertible that he had for 4 years. He actually sent me a picture of that vehicle. And so I have that in my show notes at cashcarconvert/024. Again, that's cashcarconvert/024. And you'll see Dan in his red Mercedes convertible 500 SL. It's quite a nice looking vehicle, and I can see why he hung on to it for a few years, even after the license tags needed to be renewed. Well, with that, I'm going to wrap this episode up. I want to thank all of you for listening, and I'm going to ask you to do 3 things for me if you haven't already done them. Number 1, please go out to iTunes and subscribe to the podcast. If you like what we're doing, Subscribing is a great way to help us get the downloads we need to be noticed and to move up in the rankings on iTunes. And the more people that see us, the more people I can help. The same thing is true of the second item I'm going to ask you to do, and that is to leave a rating. And that's a 1 to 5 star rating, depending on how well you think this podcast is doing. And then closely coupled with number 2 is number 3, which is to leave a written review. And the rating and review kind of go together. So if you can do those things for me, then that'll help me get noticed. And again, the more I can get noticed, the more people I can impact and help to buy a cash car and kick auto debt to the curb. So again, I want to thank you for listening. I really appreciate every listener. It means so much to me that you take time out of your busy schedule to let me speak into your life and to bring interesting people like Dan Miller on to speak into your life as well. So with that, until we speak again, hope you have a great week, and God bless you.